Next, we're going to turn to Gary Huggins, who is the Executive Director of the Commission on No Child Left Behind. Gary?
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys. And as I listen to Joseph, it sort of strikes me that no one ever refers to us as a blue ribbon commission when you're talking about Carolina. Not sure how we get our blue ribbon, but we're going to work on that. We're honorable mention at this point, I guess. But thanks for your remarks. Appreciate what you had to say. Just first, a little background on our commission. The Commission on No Child Left Behind was formed to take a look at the strengths and weaknesses of No Child Left Behind. What in the law is working, what in the law needs to be fixed, what ought to be changed. And as Michael said, we spent about a year and a half traveling the country, talking to people at all levels of K-12 governance, talking to teachers, talking to principals. We went to schools, visited with teachers, visited with students, visited with principals. Spent a lot of time talking to the people who live with this law every day. We talked to policymakers. We talked to parents. Big formal hearings around the country, 6 of those. We had roundtable discussions here in Washington where we got into deeper policy issues as well. And the commission was, again, bipartisan, made up of folks from all levels of K-12 governance. You had, again, all of these groups. We had teachers. We had former superintendents from the state level, from the district level, principal. We had 2 former governors, Tommy Thompson from Wisconsin and Roy Barnes from Georgia as our co-chairs. And these guys worked really hard in looking at what can we do, what about this law is actually helping to achieve its goals, what's holding it back, and what kind of recommendations can we make to fix it. Sort of broadly looking at conclusions, the Commission concluded that NCLB was a huge step forward for federal education policy. It changed us from a focus on process, which was typical of how we looked at education from the federal level, to a focus on results. Big step forward. Now, the Commission also concluded that the law needed a number of improvements. We put out a book with 75 fairly specific recommendations on what can be done to make the law work better for the folks it's intended to help, and what refinements and improvements can be made. But again, the bottom line was we felt this was a huge step forward in the way we do education, particularly from the federal level. It brought light and energy and focus to the right things because it was about data suddenly. We're looking at data on student achievement and results in improving student achievement, that changed the national conversation and created a national will to do something about schools that struggle. And also to look at all kids as opposed to some kids or averages and those kinds of things. NCLB, as Michael alluded to, was weak on high school accountability, though. And I see that Governor Wise is with us today, and I like his example of training for a 1-mile race by being prepared to run 3/4 of a mile. Which NCLB, again, we would argue takes us a lot of the way there, but kind of drops us off at high schools. I mean, as someone who can run about 3/4 of a mile these days, maybe I'm okay with that. But we need to go that extra step. We need to improve and take what's strong about NCLB and do those things in high schools. We need to take those important steps forward. Just a few areas I'll talk about that we touched on in high schools, and then we can go to discussion from there. And Michael talked a lot about what's at stake here, and I know Raul will as well. But first, a real strength of NCLB was that it required the disaggregation of data in tracking student achievement. Instead of looking at averages and how schools and districts were doing, we're actually looking at all groups of kids, so that there's no more invisible kids in accountability systems in states that we'd had before in CLB, and that we are making sure that all kids get their needs addressed, all kids' achievement gets focused. That's not true for high school graduation rates. We think that same logic, that same strength of NCLB ought to be applied to high school graduation rates. We ought to disaggregate that data. We ought to know how all students are doing, and we ought to work on closing those graduation rate gaps that Michael referred to as well. NCLB brought sunshine to progress. It required clear and understandable reporting on the progress of all students, all schools, all districts. This is not so for high school graduation rates. States can report those in lots of different ways that hide truths, as Joseph focused on with North Carolina. We need a consistent way of reporting graduation rate progress in high schools so that there's real accountability there. And also, another place NCLB was very weak on high school accountability is if you look at 3 through 8, it requires that student progress to proficiency. It didn't say any movement forward is progress. It said we have to progress toward a target. We have to get these students to proficiency. With graduation rates, however, any movement forward is considered progress. That needs to change. Schools and districts need to be held accountable for graduating those kids and closing the gaps in graduation rates between various groups as we disaggregate the data. And also, those schools have to be held accountable for moving student achievement as measured on assessments. The Commission believes that those two things go together. They both should have weight in determining whether schools are making AYP. Are they graduating their kids, and are those kids progressing and proficient on the substance of what the schools are teaching? Also, NCLB sought to assure that all students were held to high expectations for mastering challenging content. In most cases, NCLB failed in that. Too many states are asking too little of students, both in the 3 through 8 and the high school level. And we made some recommendations. There's a lot of things we believe that need to be done in this area where we've fallen short. It'd be a cruel hoax if schools and districts and students and parents do everything we ask them to do and meet these targets and meet AYP, and at the end it has no meaning because our standards are too low. The Commission has made some recommendations here, whether we move toward a national model, incentives for states, some of the work being done by others to achieve the College Board and others. Something significant needs to be done to improve the level of expectations for all kids so that we have high expectations for meeting real standards. Just to sum up quickly, the Commission believes, again, these great strengths with NCLB, and not to confuse, I mean, there are a number of refinements and improvements that need to be made in looking at student progress, for instance, where we're giving credit to schools that are actually moving student achievement, even if students come to them further behind. They should get credit for making that significant progress. And we've made some recommendations along those lines. But that urgency that we talked about that NCLB has brought with this focus on data and brought to light the urgency that comes from accountability for progress, not just any forward movement, but real progress toward a goal, needs to be extended to high schools, and the Commission has several recommendations on that, and we're proud to stand here with the campaign and others and push for this in a reauthorized NCLB. So thank you, and look forward to more conversation.